Jake Morrison wiped the sweat from his forehead as he spread fresh straw across the floor of the enclosure. The morning sun on Frontier Station Delta was already hot, and he had 12 more pens to clean before noon. He didn't mind the work, though. Most people on the colony looked down on stable hands, treating them like they were barely better than the creatures they cared for. But Jake had never seen it that way. The Scarix were magnificent animals, standing nearly 3 meters tall with scales that shimmered in shades of copper and bronze. They had powerful legs built for hauling equipment across rough terrain, long muscular tails for balance, and intelligent eyes that seemed to understand more than anyone gave them credit for. Jake had worked with them for 5 years now, ever since he arrived on this remote agricultural world at the edge of human space. He knew each of the 47 Scarix on the station by name, knew their moods and preferences, knew when one was feeling ill before any scanner could detect it. "Morning, Ember," Jake said softly as he approached the largest pen. Female Scarix inside lifted her head and made a low rumbling sound deep in her chest. Copper scales caught the light as she moved toward him, and Jake smiled. Ember was special. She had bonded with him in a way that confused the other handlers. Most Scarix tolerated humans, but kept their distance. Ember sought Jake out, responded to his voice, and seemed genuinely happy when he was near. "I know, girl," Jake murmured, reaching up to scratch under her jaw where she liked it. Another long day ahead. Ember closed her eyes and leaned into his touch. Her scales were warm under his fingers, and he could feel the steady rhythm of her breathing. Sometimes when he stood this close, Jake swore he could almost sense what she was feeling. The other handlers said he was imagining things. That Scarix didn't have complex emotions, but Jake knew better. He had spent too many hours with these creatures to believe they were just dumb animals. The morning routine continued smoothly until Helen Carter, the station administrator, came hurrying across the yard. She was a tall woman in her 50s, with gray hair pulled back in a practical bun. Helen ran Frontier Station Delta with firm efficiency, and Jake respected her for treating everyone fairly regardless of their job. "Jake, we have visitors," Helen said, slightly out of breath. A Galactic Council survey ship just entered orbit. Jake straightened up. Surprise Council ships rarely came this far out. Frontier Station Delta was 40 light years from the nearest major trade route, producing grain and vegetables for the outer colonies. They were too small and remote to attract official attention. "What do they want?" Jake asked. Helen shook her head. "They didn't say much. Just that they're conducting a resource survey. The Meridian is sending down a shuttle team within the hour." Something in her tone suggested she wasn't telling him everything. But Jake didn't press. He had learned the Council business usually meant trouble for Frontier worlds by midday. The survey team had arrived. Jake watched from the stable yard as 5 aliens in Council uniforms disembarked from their sleek shuttle. The leader was a Koresh, a species known for their rigid adherence to protocol. He was tall and thin with gray skin and 4 arms, each holding a different scanning device. "I am Ambassador Ven," the Koresh announced as Helen greeted them. "We require full access to all facilities. We will begin with geological surveys and move to biological inventories." Helen nodded stiffly. "Of course, Ambassador. Whatever you need." Jake tried to stay out of their way as the survey team spread across the station, but when 2 of them approached the Scarix pens with their scanners humming, Ember and the others became agitated. The creatures shifted nervously, making distress sounds that Jake had rarely heard. "Easy, easy," Jake called out. Moving between the aliens and the pens, the Scarix calmed slightly at his voice, but they kept their eyes fixed on the strangers. One of the surveyors, a short mammalian species with orange fur, glanced at Jake dismissively. "Keep the livestock quiet," she said. "We need accurate readings." Jake bit back a response to the Council. Everything was either a resource or an obstacle. The survey team spent 3 hours examining the Scarix. Taking genetic samples and recording measurements, Jake stayed close. Keeping the animals calm with his presence, he noticed the surveyors seemed particularly interested in Ember, spending extra time scanning her. When they finally moved on to other parts of the station, Jake breathed easier. That evening, strange things began happening. The nebula that hung in the sky beyond Delta's single moon started pulsing with odd colors. Jake had seen the nebula every night for 5 years. A constant fixture of pale blue and green now, ribbons of gold and crimson wound through it like living things. Helen called an emergency meeting. The survey team had detected massive energy spikes coming from inside the nebula. Ambassador Venn stood before the assembled colonists with his forearms crossed. "There is no cause for alarm," he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "The readings are likely a natural phenomenon." But Jake noticed how the ambassador's eyes kept darting to the windows toward the changing nebula. He noticed how the other surveyors whispered urgently among themselves. Something was wrong that night. Jake couldn't sleep. He found himself walking back to the stables, drawn by an instinct he didn't understand. The Scarix were all awake, and restless Ember stood at the front of her pen, her head raised toward the sky in the dim light. Jake saw something impossible. Faint symbols were glowing along Ember's scales. Ancient markings he had never noticed before. They pulsed in rhythm with the colors in the nebula, getting brighter with each passing moment. "What's happening to you?" Jake whispered. Reaching through the fence bars, Ember turned her great head toward him, and for the first time, Jake felt something more than just animal emotion coming from her. It was like a voice without words, a presence touching the edge of his mind. Images flashed through his thoughts, too fast to fully grasp. He saw vast shapes moving through starlight, felt ages passing like heartbeats, sensed something ancient stirring from a long sleep. The connection broke, leaving Jake gasping. Ember made a sound he had never heard from any Scarix before. It was almost like speech, like she was trying to tell him something desperately important. Across the yard, alarm klaxons suddenly began wailing. Jake ran toward the control center, where he found Helen and the survey team staring at the main display screen. The nebula was tearing itself apart. Massive objects were emerging from its heart, each one the size of a small moon. They moved with obvious intelligence and purpose, heading straight for Frontier Station. Delta Ambassador Venn's face had gone even grayer than usual. "This is impossible," he breathed. "They're supposed to be extinct." "Who?" Jake demanded. Venn turned to look at him, and Jake saw fear in the alien's eyes. "The Elder Dragons," Venn said. "They're waking up." The control center erupted into chaos as the massive shapes drew closer. Helen barked orders to evacuate non-essential personnel, while Ambassador Venn frantically contacted his ship in orbit. Jake stood frozen, watching the display screens show 3 enormous draconic forms approaching the station. Each one was easily a kilometer long, with wings that seemed to fold space itself as they moved. Their scales reflected starlight in patterns of deep purple and silver, and even through the sensors, Jake could feel the raw power emanating from them. "We need to leave now," one of the survey team members shouted. "Those things could destroy this entire planet." But Ambassador Venn shook his head, his forearms moving across the communication panel. "The Meridian is already pulling back to a safe distance. We can't risk bringing those creatures near the ship. So you're leaving us here," Helen said, her voice cold with fury. Venn wouldn't meet her eyes. "The Council will send appropriate military support. Until then, maintain lockdown protocols and do not, under any circumstances, attempt to communicate with them." Jake's hands clenched into fists. Ambassador was abandoning an entire colony of 300 people to save himself. Before he could say anything, a deep vibration rolled through the station. It wasn't sound exactly, but something that resonated in Jake's chest and bones. Every light flickered, and several displays went dark in the stables. The Scarix began calling out in unison, their voices rising in what sounded almost like a song. Jake turned and ran back toward the pens. Ignoring Helen's shout for him to stop, he had to reach Ember. The stable yard was bathed in strange light now. The glowing symbols on Ember's scales had spread, covering her entire body in intricate patterns. The other Scarix showed the same markings, though none as bright as Ember's. They were all facing the sky, where the three elder dragons had taken up positions above the station. Jake Morrison. A voice spoke his name. He spun around, but saw no one. The voice came again, not through his ears, but directly into his mind. It was ancient and powerful, carrying weight that made his knees weak. Jake Morrison. Approach. You are the one who tends our children. Jake's heart pounded. The voice was coming from the elder dragons themselves. Somehow they were speaking to him through Ember, through the connection he had always felt but never fully understood. Your children, Jake whispered. Ember turned her great head toward him, and this time the images that flooded his mind were clear and unmistakable. He saw the Scarix not as livestock but as they truly were, descendants of the elder dragons themselves. Thousands of years ago, when the dragons had been forced into hiding, they had scattered their offspring across the galaxy. The young had evolved and changed, adapted to dozens of different worlds, but they carried the dragon essence within them. The Scarix weren't animals at all. They were the sleeping children of an ancient race, waiting for their ancestors to wake. I didn't know, Jake said aloud, his voice shaking. No one knew. Most did not need to know. The voice responded, most species enslaved our children or killed them. But you, Jake Morrison, you cared for them with kindness and respect. You treated them as beings worthy of dignity. That is why we speak to you now. Behind him, Jake heard running footsteps. Helen, Ambassador Ven, and several others had followed him to the stables. They stared in shock at the glowing Scarix and the massive elder dragons hovering above. What is happening? Helen demanded before Jake could answer. One of the elder dragons began descending. It was the largest of the three, with scales that shimmered like liquid. Moonlight. Its wings created winds that bent the nearby trees flat as it settled onto the open ground beyond the stables. The sheer size of the creature was overwhelming. Its head alone was larger than the administration building, and its eyes glowed with ancient intelligence. Stay back, Ambassador Ven commanded, pulling out some kind of weapon. These creatures are dangerous. But Jake felt no danger from the elder dragon through Ember. He sensed only curiosity and a deep, sorrowful longing. She won't hurt us, Jake said quietly. She just wants to see her children. Ven stared at him. How do you know that? Because I can hear her, Jake replied. Through the Scarix, through Ember. The elder dragon's massive head lowered until one enormous eye was level with Jake up close. He could see that her scales weren't just purple, but held every color imaginable, shifting and flowing like oil on water. I am Matriarch Ethera, the voice in his mind said. I speak for the 12 who sleep in the eternal dark. We watch this sector of space from our refuge, waiting for stability to return. When we sensed our descendants, we came to reclaim them. Jake took a step forward, drawn by something he couldn't name. They're not just descendants, he said. They're their own beings now. They've lived and grown here. They're part of our colony. Ethera's eyes seemed to study him intently. You speak truth, small one. They have become something new, neither fully dragon nor fully themselves, but they remember us in their blood. And we remember them. Tell me, Jake Morrison, why did your kind nurture them when so many others would exploit or destroy? Jake thought about all the hours he had spent in the stables, all the small kindnesses he had shown to creatures others dismissed as simple livestock because they deserved it. He said simply, because treating something with respect costs nothing. And it's the right thing to do. We didn't know they were anything special. We just knew they were alive and in our care. For a long moment, Ethera was silent. Then Jake felt something like warmth flooding through the mental connection. Your species is young and often foolish, Ethera said, but in you, we see the potential for greatness. You will speak for us. Jake Morrison, you will be the bridge between our kinds. Before Jake could respond, new alarms began blaring. From the control center, Helen checked her portable communicator and her face went pale. 30 Council warships just jumped into the system, she said. They're demanding the Elder Dragons leave immediately or face military action. Ambassador Ven's expression was grim. The Council will not allow the Vanged Dragons to remain free. We drove them to extinction once. We'll do it again, if necessary. Jake felt cold fury rising in his chest. You did what? Ven finally met his eyes. The Elder Dragons were peacekeepers eons ago. They stopped the Council's expansion, limited our wars. They made us follow rules we didn't want, so we united against them and hunted them until they fled into the dark. We thought they were gone forever. Ethera's mental voice turned hard as iron. And now you come with weapons to finish what you started. But we are not the helpless refugees you remember. We are the 12. And we have slept long enough. The other 2 Elder Dragons descended to join Ethera, forming a protective circle around the station. Jake could see more shapes emerging from the nebula now. 9 more massive forms joined the first 312 Elder Dragons. Just as Ethera had said, the most ancient and powerful beings in the galaxy, thought dead for millennia, and they were here, surrounding a small farming colony. Because Jake had been kind to their children. Helen grabbed Jake's arm. What do we do? The Council fleet will be in firing range within an hour. Jake looked at Ember. At the glowing symbols on her scales that marked her true heritage, he looked at Ethera, whose ancient eyes held both sorrow and determination. Then he looked at the stars, where 30 warships were coming to destroy something they feared. We tell the truth, Jake said. The whole galaxy needs to know what really happened here. The next 48 hours were the most chaotic in modern galactic history. Jake stood in the newly expanded command center on Frontier Station Delta, watching news feeds from across Council space. They broadcast that ignited a firestorm that no amount of damage control could contain on Kelvin Prime. Citizens surrounded government buildings, demanding answers about why their Thornback companions had been classified as livestock when they carried dragon heritage on Arcturus 7. The Sky Serpent preservation groups were filing lawsuits against every corporation that had ever caged or exploited their species. Dozens of worlds were discovering that creatures they had dismissed as animals were actually distant relatives of the most advanced civilization the galaxy had ever known. It's spreading faster than anyone predicted, Helen said, reviewing the incoming reports. 3 council members have already resigned. 5 more are facing votes of no confidence. Jake nodded, still trying to process how his simple broadcast had toppled government's Ambassador Ven, released from confinement after the fleet stood down, sat in the corner looking defeated. The council will never be the same, the Koresh said quietly. 20 species are demanding seats at the table. Species we've classified as non-sentient for generations. How do we even begin to fix this? You start by telling the truth. Jake replied, all of it. No more cover-ups. Through his connection to Ember, Jake felt Matriarch Ethera's approval. The Elder Dragon had remained on the station's surface with 5 of her kin, while the others returned to their nebula refuge. She was teaching Jake what it meant to be Dragon Speaker, showing him how to sense the presence of dragon descendants across vast distances. It was overwhelming. Jake could feel hundreds of thousands of minds touching the edges of his awareness, all connected through their ancient heritage. but he was learning to manage the flood of sensation, to focus on individual connections when needed. Commander Webb's ship, the Stellar Hammer, had taken up orbit as an unofficial guardian. The Admiral had submitted his resignation to the Council, but they had refused to accept it. Instead, they were threatening him with court-martial for failing to eliminate the dragon threat. "They're making me a scapegoat," Webb told Jake during one of their daily calls. "The Admiralty wants someone to blame for this mess. Let them try," Lieutenant Lisa Grant said from beside Webb. She had been promoted to his second-in-command after her actions on the bridge. "Huff, the fleet is ready to testify about the illegal orders we received. This goes all the way to the top." Jake appreciated their support, but he knew the Council wouldn't give up power easily. He had been receiving coded threats through back channels, warnings to recant his statements or face consequences. Matriarch Ethera wanted to intervene directly, to force the Council to accept new terms, but Jake had convinced her to wait. "If you impose your will on them, you become what they claimed you were," he argued. "We need to give people time to make their own choices. And if they choose war," Ethera asked, "then we'll face it together." Jake replied, "But I don't think it'll come to that. People are angry. They're learning they've been lied to for thousands of years. The Council can't hold power without the consent of those they govern." He was proven right on the third day after the standoff. A coalition of 27 species formally withdrew from the Council, announcing the formation of a new alliance. They called it the Sanctuary Accord, and they invited the Elder Dragons to join as founding members. The announcement came from an unlikely source, a Thornback rider from Kelvin Prime named Marcus Chun, who had become the face of the Dragon Descendant Rights Movement. "We've been treated as property for too long," Marcus declared in a broadcast that rivaled Jake's in reach. "My family has bred and raised Thornbacks for 4 generations. We thought we were ranchers. Now we know we were slave owners. That ends today. We're offering every dragon descendant species full citizenship in the sanctuary. No more exploitation. No more classification as animals or resources. We start fresh, with respect and equality for all." The old Council fractured completely within hours. Some species tried to maintain the status quo, but their citizens revolted. Others immediately petitioned to join the Sanctuary Accord within a week. The political map of the galaxy had been redrawn. Helen found Jake in the stables, where he was grooming Ember, despite his new responsibilities. "You could delegate this, you know," she said with amusement. "You're kind of a big deal now." Jake smiled, running the brush along Ember's copper scales. The glowing symbols had faded to a soft shimmer, but they were still visible. "Being important doesn't mean I should stop caring for those who matter to me," he said. Helen sat on a nearby hay bale, watching him work. "The Sanctuary Accord wants to make Frontier Station Delta their capital," she said. "They're calling it Dragon's Hearth now. They want you to be their first ambassador." Jake paused mid-brush stroke. "Me? What do I know about diplomacy? You prevented a war with a single broadcast," Helen pointed out. "You convinced an entire fleet to disobey orders because it was the right thing to do. You're the dragon speaker, the only person who can communicate with both the Elder Dragons and their descendants. If that's not diplomatic credentials, I don't know what is." Before Jake could respond, alarms sounded again, but these weren't emergency warnings. They were arrival notifications. Jake and Helen rushed outside to find the sky filled with ships. Not warships this time, but civilian transports, cargo haulers, and colony vessels. Hundreds of them, coming from dozens of different worlds. "What's happening?" Jake asked. Commander Webb's voice came over the communicators. "Jake, you need to see this. People are coming to Dragon's Hearth. Thousands of them. Species with dragon heritage who want to meet the Elder Dragons. Families who've been caring for dragon descendants and just learned the truth. Even some former Council officials who want to help build something better." Jake watched in Amazement, as the first ships began landing at Kelvin Prime Transport, opened its bay doors to reveal 50 Thornbacks and their riders an Arcturus vessel released. Sky serpents who took to the air with joyful cry ship after ship brought more dragon descendants. More people seeking a new beginning. Matriarch Ithera landed beside Jake, her massive form casting a shadow across the landing field. "They come home," she said, her mental voice filled with emotion. "After 3,000 years of separation, our children return." Jake felt tears streaming down his face as he watched the Runyan Thornbacks approach the elder dragons cautiously. Then, with growing confidence, Sky Serpents performed aerial displays around the ancient beings who were their ancestors. Even the Scarix from the station pens walked out to meet their kin. Ember stood beside Jake, pressing her warm scales against his side. Through their connection, he felt her joy and wonder. She was no longer just a work animal in a stable. She was part of something greater, a family reunited across time and space. "This is just the beginning," Matriarch Ithera said. "The sanctuary will grow. More species will discover their heritage. And you, Jake Morrison, will guide them through this transition. You will help build bridges between those who knew and those who are still learning." Jake looked around at the organized chaos of the landing field. Helen was directing traffic with practiced efficiency. Commander Webb and Lieutenant Grant were helping coordinate ship placements. Ambassador Venn was actually assisting, having apparently decided to throw his lot in with the new order. And everywhere, beings of all kinds were working together. Some had known about their dragon heritage for days. Others were just discovering it, but they were united by the desire to build something better than what had come before. "I'm still just a stable hand," Jake said to Ithera. "I take care of those who need caring for. That's all I know how to do." Ithera's massive eye focused on him with ancient wisdom. "That is exactly why you were chosen. Speaker, empires are built by conquerors and collapse into dust, but compassion endures. You tend the bonds between beings with the same care you gave to Ember when everyone else saw only a beast of burden. That is the foundation of true civilization." A young girl approached Jake hesitantly. She couldn't have been more than 10 years old, with a small dragon descendant creature perched on their shoulder. "Excuse me," she said shyly. "Are you really the dragon speaker?" Jake knelt down to her level. "I am. What's your name?" "Sophie." The girl replied. "I came with my family from New Portland. This is Spark." She indicated the creature on her shoulder. "We just found out she's not a pet. She's a dragon descendant called a flame skink. I feel bad for treating her like an animal." Jake smiled gently. "Did you take care of her? Did you make sure she had food and was safe?" Sophie nodded. "Every day." "Then you did exactly what she needed." Jake said, "Spark doesn't know the difference between being a pet and being family. She just knows you cared for her. That's what matters." Sophie's face brightened. "Really? Really?" Jake confirmed. "Love and respect don't change just because we learn new information. If anything, now you can appreciate Spark even more for who she truly is." The girl hugged her companion. "Thank you, Dragon Speaker." As Sophie ran off to rejoin her family, Helen appeared at Jake's side. "That was well done," she said. "You're getting good at this." Jake watched more ships landing, more reunions happening across the field. "I'm just telling them what I learned from Ember," he said, "that every being deserves to be treated with dignity, regardless of what we think we know about them." Jake stood in the colony's main communication center with his heart racing. Helen had given him access to the long-range broadcast system, though she looked uncertain about what he was planning. Ambassador Venn and his team had been confined to quarters after trying to sabotage the equipment. The Council fleet was 30 minutes away and closing fast. "Are you sure about this?" Helen asked. "Once you send this out, there's no taking it back." Jake's hand hovered over the activation switch through his connection with Ember. He could feel Matriarch Ethera waiting patiently outside. The Elder Dragon had shared her memories with him. Thousands of years of history that the Council had tried to erase. The galaxy deserves to know the truth. Jake said he pressed the switch. The broadcast system came to life, linking to every major communication relay within 20 light years within minutes. His message would spread across hundreds of worlds. "My name is Jake Morrison," he began, speaking into the recorder. "I'm a stable hand on Frontier Station Delta, and I need to tell you about the greatest lie in galactic history." He told them everything, how the Elder Dragons had once kept peace in this region of space, preventing the Council from conquering weaker species. How the Council had united their military forces and driven the dragons into exile, hunting them relentlessly. How the Council had then erased all records of the dragons, teaching future generations that they were myths or monsters. But they weren't monsters. Jake continued. They were beings who believed in justice and protecting the innocent. And when they had to flee, they scattered their children across the galaxy to survive. Those children evolved into dozens of different species. The Scarix we've been using as work animals, the Thornbacks on Kelvin Prime, the Sky Serpents of Arcturus 7, hundreds of species across Council space carry dragon genetic markers. The Council has been exploiting them for generations, without even knowing what they were. He paused, letting that sink in. Then he activated the data files that Ethera had helped him compile. "I'm sending you proof," Jake said. "Genetic analyses, historical records from the Dragon's own archives. Everything you need to verify what I'm saying. The Elder Dragons have awakened, and they're not here to conquer anyone. They just want to reunite with their descendants and live in peace. But the Council is sending 30 warships to destroy them, right now, because they're afraid of the truth coming out." He took a deep breath. "I'm asking you, all of you watching across Council space, don't let this happen. Don't let them commit genocide to cover up their crimes. We're better than this. We have to be." Jake ended the transmission and slumped back in his chair within seconds. The communication board lit up with incoming messages. Helen stared at the display in amazement. "Jake, it's everywhere. Every major news network is picking it up. Government channels, social feeds, everything." Outside, Matriarch Ethera's mental voice touched Jake's mind. "You have done well, Speaker. Now we wait to see if your kind values truth over fear." The Council fleet arrived in orbit exactly on schedule. Jake watched through the observation windows as 30 massive warships took up attack positions around the Elder Dragons. The lead ship, a heavy dreadnought called the Stellar Hammer, opened a channel to the station as stern-faced. Human Admiral appeared on the screen. "This is Fleet Commander Darius Webb," he announced. "I am authorized by the Galactic Council to remove the Elder Dragon threat by any means necessary. All station personnel have 10 minutes to evacuate. After that, we will open fire." Helen stepped forward. "Commander, have you seen the broadcast from—" "I've seen it," Webb interrupted, "and I have my orders. The Council considers the dragons a clear and present danger. This isn't negotiable." Jake moved to stand beside Helen. "Commander, please, just give people time to verify the information. If you attack now, you'll be starting a war." Webb's expression was granite. "The dragons started this war thousands of years ago. We're finishing it." But even as he spoke, Jake noticed something. The bridge crew behind Webb looked uncertain. Several were whispering to each other and glancing at secondary screens. The broadcast was spreading faster than anyone had anticipated. Webb seemed to notice his crew's reactions. "Maintain formation," he ordered. "Prepare weapons. 5 minutes to firing range." Jake felt Ethera's presence grow stronger in his mind. "Small one, "We will not attack these ships," she said, "but neither will we allow ourselves to be destroyed. If they fire upon us, we will defend ourselves. Many will die, I know." Jake replied silently, "I'm trying to stop this." The minutes crawled by with agonizing slowness. Jake watched the tactical display show the fleet's weapons. Charging, he saw the Elder Dragons take defensive positions, their own ancient power beginning to build, and he saw something else. Ships breaking formation. First one, then three. Then a dozen vessels began moving away from attack positions. Commander Webb's voice cut across all channels. Sharp with anger, "Maintain your positions." That's a direct order. But more ships continued to drift out of formation on Webb's bridge. Jake could see crew members openly arguing with their superiors. One young woman in an officer's uniform stepped forward into the camera's view. "Commander, I'm sorry, but I can't follow this order," she said. Her voice was shaking but determined. "Lieutenant Lisa Grant, you are relieved of duty," Webb snapped. "Security, remove her from the bridge." But the security officers didn't move one of them. A burly man with sergeant stripes shook his head. "Sir, with respect, we've all seen the evidence. If what that colonist said is true, we'd be committing war crimes, genociding a sentient species that hasn't attacked anyone." Webb's face flushed red. "You're all facing court-martial. The council gave explicit orders. The council lied to us." Lieutenant Grant interrupted. "Sir, my family owns Stormbacks. I grew up riding them. The genetic data in that broadcast proves they're dragon descendants. How many other species that we've domesticated or enslaved carry that same heritage? How many beings have we been treating as animals when they're actually the children of an advanced civilization?" The bridge dissolved into chaos as more officers joined the argument on other ships across the fleet. Jake could see similar scenes playing out. The broadcast hadn't just reached civilians, it had reached the crews, who were being ordered to pull the triggers. Helen gripped Jake's shoulder. "It's working," she breathed. "They're standing down, but not all of them." 5 ships maintained their attack formation, their weapons fully charged. These were commanded by hardliners, officers who valued orders over ethics. All vessels. "This is Commander Webb," the admiral said, his voice tight. "Those ships refusing to engage are hereby declared in mutiny. The rest of you, fire at will." For a terrible moment, Jake thought it was over. 5 warships were more than enough to devastate the station and wound the Elder Dragons. But then Lieutenant Grant did something extraordinary. She moved to the weapons console on the stellar hammers bridge and locked it down. "I'm sorry, Commander," she said, "but I won't let you do this." The security sergeant and several other crew members physically blocked Webb from reaching here in the tactical display. The stellar hammer's weapons went offline. The other 4 ships hesitated, suddenly alone in their attack posture. "This is insane," Webb shouted. "You're all traitors." "No, sir," Lieutenant Grant replied quietly. "We're preventing you from becoming a war criminal." There's a difference. The standoff held for 30 seconds that felt like hours then. One by one, the remaining 4 ships powered down their weapons. Their commanders had seen what was happening across the fleet and made their choices. Jake let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding through the windows. He saw the 12 Elder Dragons had moved into a new formation. They were no longer defensive, they were bowing all. 12 of these ancient, powerful beings lowered their massive heads toward the small station. Below toward Jake, Matriarch Ethera's voice filled his mind with warmth. "You have proven yourself worthy, Jake Morrison, not through strength or dominance, but through courage and truth. From this day forward, you are Dragon Speaker, the first in 3,000 years. You will stand between our people and yours. helping both sides understand each other. Jake felt tears on his face. "I'm just a stable hand," he whispered. "You were a stable hand." Ethera replied, "Now you are the bridge between worlds. And you have shown the galaxy that sometimes the greatest power comes not from weapons or threats, but from simple decency and the courage to speak truth when everyone else stays silent." On the Stellar Hammers Bridge, Commander Webb stood with his shoulders slumped. The fight had gone out of him. "What have I done?" he said softly. Lieutenant Grant moved to his side. "What you were ordered to do?" "Sir, but you can still make this right." Webb looked at her. Then at the tactical display showing the peaceful dragons finally. He nodded. "Open a channel to the station," he ordered, "all frequencies." When Jake appeared on his screen, Webb took a deep breath. "Jake Morrison, on behalf of the Council Fleet. I apologize. We came here to commit an atrocity. Your broadcast and the courage of my crew stopped us." "Thank you." Jake smiled through his tears. "Thank you for listening, Commander. That took courage too." 1 year later, Jake stood on the observation deck of what used to be Frontier Station Delta and was now officially Dragon's Hearth, capital of the Sanctuary Alliance. The small farming colony had transformed into a thriving hub of interspecies cooperation where there had been simple prefab buildings. Now stood towers designed to accommodate beings of all sizes from human scale to elder dragon dimensions. The stable yard, where Jake had once worked alone, now sprawled across 50 square kilometers, housing thousands of dragon descendants from across the galaxy. But despite his elevated status as Dragon Speaker and Alliance Ambassador, Jake still spent his mornings in those stables. Old habits died hard, and he found peace in the routine of caring for the creatures who had started this entire revolution. "You're going to be late for the ceremony," Helen called out as she approached. She wore formal robes now, having been elected governor of Dragon's Hearth by unanimous vote, but she still walked through mud and hay without complaint. "Checking on things personally." "I know," Jake replied, finishing his work with a young sky serpent who had arrived last week. But Storm here needed attention. "She's still adjusting to life away from her birth world," Helen smiled. "That's why people trust you." "Jake, you never put politics ahead of basic kindness." They walked together toward the Great Hall, a massive structure built to accommodate both human-sized delegates and elder dragons. Today was the 1-year anniversary of the standoff that had changed everything, and beings from across the sanctuary had gathered to commemorate it as they entered. Jake saw hundreds of familiar faces. Commander Darius Webb stood near the front, wearing the uniform of Sanctuary Defense Command after the old council had tried to court-martial him. Webb had resigned and immediately joined the new alliance. His experience and integrity had made him the obvious choice to lead their defense forces. Beside him was Lieutenant Lisa Grant. Now a full commander herself, she had become a vocal advocate for ethical military conduct. Teaching classes at the new Officer Academy, Ambassador Venn was there too, one of the few former council officials who had genuinely embraced change. The Koresh had spent the year traveling between old council worlds and the sanctuary, helping negotiate peaceful transitions of power. Young Sophie, the girl Jake had met on that first chaotic day, sat in the youth section with Spark on her shoulder. The Flameskink had grown larger over the year, and Sophie had become something of a junior ambassador herself, teaching other children about respecting dragon descendants. Marcus Chun, the Thornback rider who had helped lead the uprising on Kelvin Prime, waved at Jake from across the room. His advocacy work had helped millions of dragon descendants gain legal recognition as sentient beings rather than property. The ceremony began with Matriarch Ethera addressing the assembly. Her physical form was too large for even the Great Hall, so she remained outside with the other elder dragons, but her mental voice reached everyone through the network of dragon descendants present. 1 year ago, we awoke from our long sleep expecting to find a galaxy still hostile to our existence, Athera said. Instead, we found Jake Morrison, a stable hand who had spent 5 years caring for our children with no expectation of reward or recognition. His simple act of kindness became the seed from which this entire sanctuary grew. Today, 47 species are part of our alliance. 12 billion beings live under laws that recognize the inherent dignity of all sentient life. We have established educational exchanges, trade agreements, and mutual defense pacts built on respect rather than dominance. This is not perfection. We still face challenges, still struggle with old prejudices and new misunderstandings, but we are trying together to build something better. Jake felt the weight of her words. The past year hadn't been easy. 7 worlds had refused to join the sanctuary and remain part of the restructured council, now called the Confederated Systems. There had been border disputes, trade disagreements, and cultural clashes as beings learned to see each other differently. But there had been no wars, no genocides, no attempts to dominate or destroy. Just the hard, messy work of building a civilization based on cooperation. When Athera finished, Helen took the stage. I've been asked to speak about the human perspective on this past year, she said, about what it means to go from a forgotten farming colony to the center of galactic politics. But honestly, not much has changed for us. We still grow food. We still care for the beings in our trust. We still wake up every day and try to do right by our neighbors. What changed is that the rest of the galaxy finally started paying attention to values that frontier communities have held for generations. Respect, hard work, taking care of each other. Jake didn't invent those principles. He just lived them, even when no one was watching. That's what made him the perfect choice to be Dragon Speaker. He doesn't tell people what to do. He shows them, through his actions, who they could choose to be. Jake felt his face flush with embarrassment as Helen continued. This past year, I've watched Jake negotiate treaties with the patience of a teacher. I've seen him mediate disputes between species who've been enemies for centuries. I've watched him welcome refugees, comfort the grieving, and celebrate with the joyful. And every single morning, before any of that important work begins, I've seen him in the stables, brushing scales, checking on injuries, making sure every creature under our care knows they matter. That's the foundation of everything we've built here. Not grand speeches or political maneuvering, just consistent, daily kindness. The assembly rose in applause. Jake wanted to sink through the floor, but Ember's mental presence steadied him. His first friend among the Scarix had become his constant companion, helping him manage the overwhelming responsibilities of his position. After the ceremony, Jake found himself surrounded by well-wishers, shook hands, accepted congratulations, and posed for more pictures than he could count. Finally, he managed to slip away to his favorite spot, a quiet overlook where he could see both the expanded stable complex and the stars beyond. Commander Webb found him there an hour later, hiding from your own party, the older man said with amusement. Jake shrugged. Just needed some air. All those people treating me like I'm special, when I just did what anyone should do. Webb leaned against the railing beside him. That's exactly the point, Jake. You did what anyone should do, but most people don't. That makes you rare, worth celebrating. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. I owe you an apology, Webb said finally. When I arrived here a year ago, I came to commit murder. I was ready to follow orders without question, to destroy beings I'd been told were dangerous. You stopped me from becoming a monster. Jake turned to look at him. You stopped yourself. Commander, I just gave you the information. You needed to make a different choice, but you're the one who made it. Webb smiled. Sadly, I still see their faces sometimes. The Elder dragons in my targeting sights. I came so close to pulling that trigger, then use that memory. Jake said, let it remind you why we built the sanctuary. So, no one else has to face that choice. So commanders aren't given orders to commit atrocities. So fear doesn't drive us to destroy what we don't understand. Webb nodded. Slowly you're wise beyond your years. I'm 28. And I still can't figure out how to tie a formal necktie. Jake replied with a grin. Helen had to help me get dressed for the ceremony. That broke the somber mood. Webb laughed genuinely. For the first time since Jake had known him. Fair enough. But you're still the person I trust most in this galaxy. That has to count for something. As the sun set over Dragon's Hearth, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold, more people joined Jake at the overlook. Helen came, then Sophie with Spark. Then Marcus Chun and Ambassador Van Lisa Grant arrived with a group of young officers she was mentoring. They stood together watching the day end. This unlikely collection of beings who had chosen to believe in something better. Matriarch Athera's mental voice touched all of them gently. I am all beyond your comprehension, she said. I have seen civilizations rise and fall, witnessed wonders and horrors that would break your minds. But in all my long existence, I have rarely seen anything as beautiful as what you have built here. A stable hand who became a speaker, a farmer who became a governor, a soldier who chose mercy over duty, a child who learned to see beyond labels. Each of you represents the best of what your species can be, and together, you prove that cooperation is not weakness, that kindness is not foolishness, that treating others with dignity costs nothing and gains everything. Jake felt Ember press against his side. Her scales warm in the cooling evening through their bond. He sensed the presence of thousands of other dragon descendants across the hearth, each one connected to the ancient beings who had awakened to find themselves not alone, but surrounded by children they had never known. What happens now? Sophie asked, her young voice clear in the quiet. Jake considered the question carefully. Now we keep going, he said. We keep learning about each other. We keep building bridges. We keep choosing kindness even when it's hard. The confederated systems are still out there, and some of them still see us as a threat. There will be challenges and setbacks, but as long as we remember why we started this, as long as we treat each being with the respect they deserve, we'll be okay. Helen put a hand on his shoulder. Listen to you. Being all wise and inspiring. I remember when your biggest concern